Are you deaf? Or just incapable of following basic instructions? Ms. Whitfield Judge Walter Pruitt's gavel cracked down like a rifle shot, the sound bouncing off the dead silent walls of his courtroom. People like you walk in here thinking the law bends around your confusion. It doesn't. Pay the fine, or my bailiff will be escorting you to a holding cell. Camille Whitfield didn't flinch. She simply looked back at him with a calm, unreadable half-smile. Judge Pruitt believed he was putting an unremarkable woman in her place. He had no idea she was the one person in the entire state with the authority to end his career by sundown. The thick, syrupy heat of a Carolina summer pressed against the glass doors of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. But inside Courtroom 12, the air conditioning ran so cold it felt like walking into a meat locker. It was a Thursday morning, what the clerks privately called cattle call day, when traffic tickets, small civil disputes, and code violations got crammed wall to wall onto a single docket. The gallery benches, worn shiny by decades of nervous citizens, were packed with people checking watches, shuffling papers, whispering to each other under their breath. At the front of the room, raised above everyone, like a man on a throne he'd built himself, sat Superior Court Judge Walter Pruitt. He wore his 64 years with an aggressive, performative confidence, his face perpetually flushed from decades of rich dinners and full-bodied red wine at the Wexford Hunt Club. He was a product of the old money network golf weekends, quiet favors, political friendships that insulated him completely from the consequences of his own temper. To Pruitt, the bench wasn't a place where blind justice happened. It was a stage, and he was its only star. In the third row of the gallery sat Camille Whitfield. Anyone who looked closely might have noticed the sharp, assessing intelligence behind her eyes. But nobody looked closely. That was exactly the point. Today she'd left behind her usual armor, the sharply tailored suits, the commanding presence she normally carried into any room. Instead, she wore a faded mustard yellow cardigan, a chambray blouse gone soft from washing, and a plain brown skirt, worn canvas sneakers, thick tortoiseshell glasses that blurred her cheekbones. Her hair was twisted into a tight low braid. She looked tired. She looked unremarkable. She looked exactly as vulnerable as she needed to look. For 2 hours, she'd sat motionless, watching Judge Pruitt work the room. And it was worse than she'd expected. She watched him tear into a stammering young public defender, sighing theatrically into his microphone. She watched him cut off a mother struggling to translate a housing notice for her teenage son, snapping at her to speak clearly or step aside. She watched him share a private joke with a well-dressed corporate attorney and grant a dismissal without so much as glancing at the opposing brief. Everything the complaint said about him was true. Biased, impatient, cruel in small, practiced increments. The folder in her lap held the details of Whitfield v. Briar Creek Property Owners Association, a manufactured, low-stakes dispute over a fence line, engineered for exactly one purpose, to put her directly in front of Walter Pruitt. She'd come a long way to sit in this gallery. A top-of-her-class graduate of Vanderbilt University Law School, she'd spent a decade in the trenches of civil rights litigation before being asked to take on something bigger. To Judge Pruitt, glancing out over a docket of 40 names before his 1230 lunch reservation, she was nothing a stranger. He'd forget within the hour. Case number 2, 3C V 1842. The clerk announced over the PA system. Whitfield versus Briar Creek Property Owners Association. Partie. Please step forward. Camille took a slow breath. Let her shoulders round. Let her chin tip down just enough. She clutched the manila folder to her chest, like a shield. Across the aisle, opposing counsel Rose Harold Pemberton, a silver-combed 60-something with an immaculately tailored suit and a reputation for terrorizing homeowners on behalf of wealthy property associations. He was also one of Pruitt's regular golf partners. They shared the same brand of comfortable entitlement. Camille walked down the center aisle, her sneakers silent on the worn linoleum. Pruitt didn't look up. He was signing a stack of orders. A sleek black pen with his initials engraved in silver, scratching loudly across the paper. He let them stand there in silence for nearly half a minute, a small, deliberate cruelty meant to remind everyone in the room exactly how little they mattered. Finally he capped the pen, leaned back in his leather chair, and peered over his reading glasses. His eyes drifted over Harold Pemberton with a faint nod of recognition, then settled. Heavier. En Camille. His upper lip curled. He saw the cardigan. He saw the lack of representation. He saw exactly what he wanted to see. Let's get this over with. Pruitt grumbled into his microphone, his voice a gravelly baritone built for instant obedience. I have Mr. Pemberton here for Briar Creek. And for the plaintiff, he squinted at the docket, deliberately mangling the name. Camilla Whitford, is that you? It's Camille. Your Honor. She corrected softly. Camille Whitfield. I'm appearing pro se. Pruitt let out aloud. Theatrical snort. Glancing toward Pemberton with a conspiratorial smirk. Brossi. Wonderful. Another amateur hour. Miss Whitfield. Do you actually know what that phrase means? Or did you pick it up off a courtroom drama? It means I'm representing myself. Your Honor, she said, keeping her face perfectly blank. It means, Pruitt corrected sharply, jabbing a thick finger toward her, that you're wasting this court's time because you were too cheap, or too stubborn, to hire someone who actually knows what they're doing. This isn't a town meeting. This is a court of law. And I expect adherence to the rules of civil procedure, though I doubt you know the first thing about civil procedure. Pemberton chuckled from the defense podium. If I may. Your Honor, this is a straightforward property line violation. Ms. Whitfield's fence encroaches on Briar Creek's bylaws. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. Agreed. Pruitt said, his tone instantly warming. Seems cut and dry. Ms. Whitfield, did you not read the bylaws before you moved into that neighborhood? I did read them. Your Honor, Camille said, opening her folder. In fact, I have a copy here. Under Section 4. Paragraph B. I don't need you reading me bylaws. Girl. The word landed flat and hard, and the courtroom went still. A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, calling a grown black woman girl. In that tone, in that room, was its own small, deliberate cruelty, and everyone present understood exactly what it carried. Camille's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Keep going. Walter, she thought. Give me everything I need. Your Honor, she continued, voice perfectly level. I only raised Section 4 because the fence was built by the previous owner back in 2016, which places enforcement outside the statute of limitations under state property code. Oh, Lord, save me from internet lawyers. Pruitt threw his hands up, playing to the gallery. You people read one paragraph online, and suddenly you think you're Perry Mason. He leaned aggressively over the bench. Let me explain something in words simple enough for you. I don't care what some website told you the code says. I care about the facts. And the facts are you're in violation. People from where you're coming from always seem to think the rules are optional. You move into a respectable place like Briar Creek, and you bring that same attitude right in with you. Not in my county. Not in my courtroom. At the defense table, Harold Pemberton shifted, visibly uncomfortable. Even for Pruitt. This was crossing into something actionable. But he said nothing. He wasn't about to bite the hand of a judge who consistently ruled in his favor. Camille felt a cold. Satisfied, click settle in her chest. There it is. On the record, she glanced toward the court reporter, a young woman named Monica, fingers flying across the stenograph, and let herself breathe. Your Honor, Camille said, her voice dropping a fraction, losing some of its artificial softness. Are you implying my background has some bearing on the legal merits of a fence dispute? Pruitt's face flushed a deep, furious red. No pro se litigant had ever questioned him like this. What I'm implying, Miss Whitfield, is that you're out of your depth and out of order. You'll stand there, keep your mouth shut, and speak only when spoken to. Understood. I'm simply trying to present my evidence. Your Honor, your evidence is garbage. Pruitt bellowed, slamming his palm against the bench. He turned to Pemberton. What's your motion? We're asking for immediate removal of the fence. Pemberton said smoothly, recovering his composure. And an award of attorney's fees in the amount of $11,400. Given the frivolous nature of the defense, a gasp rippled through the gallery. $11,000 for a fence dispute was an obscene, punishing figure for anyone living paycheck to paycheck. Granted, Pruitt said immediately, without glancing at a single page of paperwork. Objection. Your Honor, Camille said firmly, plaintiff hasn't submitted billing records to justify that figure, and ruling before I've presented my defense is a due process violation. Pruitt picked up his gavel slowly, his eyes wide with an unhinged fury, pointing the handle directly at her face. Miss Whitfield, you are standing on the very edge of a cliff. One more word, one single syllable, and I will find you in direct contempt of this court. My bailiff will put you in handcuffs, and you can spend the next 72 hours in county lockup thinking about your attitude. Do I make myself clear? The room felt like all the oxygen had been pulled out of it. The bailiff near the jury box shifted his weight, resting a hand on his belt. Camille stood at the podium, the threat of handcuffs hanging in the air. For one fleeting second, she pictured the cold metal closing around her wrists. She didn't step back. She didn't lower her eyes. I understand you perfectly. Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying a quiet, chilling authority entirely out of place for a cardigan-wearing pro se litigant. I just want to make sure the record reflects your ruling accurately. She turned her head toward the stenograph. Monica, did you get all of that? The comments about my background, the remarks about where I'm coming from, the refusal to let me present evidence before ruling. The young court reporter swallowed hard, eyes flicking nervously between Camille and the judge. Yes. Ma'am, it's all on the record. Pruitt exploded. The gavel came down with a deafening crack. That's it, bailiff. Take her into custody. I find this woman indirect, Your Honor. If I may. Harold Pemberton interrupted, panic bleeding into his voice. Something about the way Camille was standing, the total absence of fear, the deliberate check with the court reporter, sent a cold shiver down his spine. It felt wrong. It felt like a trap. The association would be satisfied with just the fence removal order. We're prepared to waive the attorney's fees entirely, to expedite the matter and clear the docket. Pruitt's chest heaved beneath his robes. He glared at Pemberton, furious at the interruption, but caught the desperate warning behind his friend's eyes. He looked back at Camille, who stood with her, hands folded, waiting patiently to be arrested. His jaw worked. He wanted to put her in a cell more than he'd wanted anything in months. But the promise of clearing his docket and making his lunch won out. Fine. Pruitt spat, throwing his pen down. Consider yourself lucky. Young lady. Mr. Pemberton's shown you mercy. You don't deserve. Fence comes down. Case closed. Get out of my courtroom. Thank you. Your Honor, Camille said. She didn't sound relieved. She sounded victorious. She closed her folder, tucked it under her arm, and looked up at him one last time. "Have a wonderful afternoon. Judge Pruitt. I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again. Very soon." Pruitt scoffed, already looking past her. "I highly doubt that. Next case." Camille walked up the center aisle, the gallery parting slightly to let her through. Faces full of a strange mixture of awe and pity. They thought she'd just barely survived a brush with disaster. None of them understood. She'd just orchestrated an execution. The moment the heavy doors of Courtroom 12 swung shut behind her, everything changed. The artificial timidity evaporated. Her shoulders snapped back. Her spine straightened. The tired, intimidated woman was gone, replaced instantly by someone radiating an entirely different kind of presence. She pulled out her phone and dialed. "Victor," she said, her voice crisp now. Nothing like the soft tone she'd used inside. "Chairwoman," came the deep, clipped voice of Victor Lane, her chief investigator. "How was the show illuminating?" Camille said, striding past a cluster of arguing attorneys who instinctively stepped out of her way. "He gave us everything. The bias, the due process violation, the contempt, threat, the cozy relationship with opposing counsel. It's all there. He didn't suspect anything. Not for a second. His ego did all the work for me." She pushed through the courthouse's heavy glass doors into the blistering heat. "I want the official transcript from Courtroom 12, subpoenaed immediately. Have Monica the reporter sign a sworn affidavit authenticating the audio backup before anyone gets the idea to misplace it. Already moving on it." Victor said, "File on your desk by 5:30. "Good." Her eyes narrowed behind the tortoiseshell glasses as she crossed toward the judge's parking lot. "Start drafting the formal charges. It's time to take out the trash." 4 miles across town, behind a row of frosted glass doors on the 9th floor of a gleaming office tower, sat the quiet, formidable offices of the state's Judicial Conduct Board. For years it had been considered toothless, a rubber-stamp committee staffed by political insiders who protected their own. That changed 6 months earlier, when the governor, facing mounting pressure over judicial misconduct, had appointed a new chairwoman. Camille walked into the executive suite, peeled off the mustard cardigan, and dropped it straight into a trash can by the door. She unlocked her private office wide windows, looking out over the Charlotte skyline, and crossed to her desk, where a slim silver plaque read Camille Whitfield, Isquen, Chairwoman, Judicial Conduct Board. She wasn't just a lawyer. She'd graduated at the top of her class from Vanderbilt, earned a Master of Laws from Columbia, and spent her career quietly dismantling corrupt institutions from the inside. Now she had the mandate, and the staff, to clean house. Victor Lane walked in, carrying a thick-bound document, dropping it onto her desk with a heavy thud. "Official transcript," he said, arms crossed. "I read it on the drive over. It's worse on paper than I expected. But you should hear the audio." The venom in his voice, "He basically lynched you from the bench." Camille opened the transcript, scanning the lines. "Girl, people from where you're coming from." Seeing it printed in black and white made her blood run cold and fed the fire already burning steadily in her chest. "We've had more than 30 anonymous complaints against him over the last 5 years," she said quietly, tracing a finger down the page. "From public defenders, procès, litigants, even a few court clerks who risked their jobs to file them, all alleging bias. All dismissed before now, because the people filing them had no power to push back. They were scared of him." Victor said, "He's connected. Golf buddies in the state legislature. Intouchable. Nobody's untouchable." Camille looked up, eyes flashing. "Tell me about his ambitions. He's not satisfied sitting on a county bench." Victor pulled a tablet from his jacket, That's where the timing gets interesting. He's the frontrunner for a vacant seat on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Lifetime federal appointment. Word is the announcement's coming within the week. He's been lobbying hard. He thinks it's already his. A slow, deliberate smile spread across Camille's face. Walter Pruitt was standing at the very edge of the career he'd spent his whole life chasing. Let him dream, she said softly. The higher he climbs, the harder he lands. So what's the play? We skipped the preliminary review, she said. All business now. We have eyewitness testimony, mine. We have the authenticated transcript. We have the audio. Draft a notice of formal proceedings. Bias and prejudice under the Code of Judicial Conduct. Denial of due process. Failure to maintain dignity and patience toward litigants. Victor nodded, already taking notes. When do we serve him? He's hosting a celebration at the Wexford Hunt Club this Friday. Camille said, pulling up his calendar on her screen, toasting his own nomination, before it's even official. Let him have his night. We serve him Monday morning. Give him exactly 72 hours to appear before the full board. He'll lawyer up. Probably hire Edmund Voss, best judicial defense attorney in the state. Let him, Camille said coldly. No lawyer alive can unring this bell. Not when the star witness is the judge of his judges. The Wexford Hunt Club was the beating heart of old Charlotte money, dark panelled walls, low chandeliers. The low murmur of deals being made over good Bordeaux. On Friday night, Walter Pruitt was the undisputed king of the room, dressed in a tuxedo, a heavy crystal glass of vintage Bordeaux in hand. He held court among a circle of state senators, lobbyists, and well-fed attorneys. I'm telling you. A senator chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. The Fourth Circuit doesn't know what's about to hit it. Finally, somebody who won't put up with all this courtroom theatre. You know me. Senator. Pruitt beamed, flushed with wine and certainty. I run a tight ship. I don't let these pro se clowns or activist lawyers waste anybody's time. Fear of God. Early and often otherwise, they run circles around you. He was days away. He believed, from a federal robe, a lifetime appointment. He'd never have to answer to a county electorate again. Across the room, near a tall ice sculpture, Camille stood in a midnight indigo gown, sapphire earrings catching the light, her hair styled into soft waves. Several men had drifted toward her and then thought better of it. Deterred by something in her bearing they couldn't quite name, Pruitt's eyes swept the room and landed on her. For half a second, his brow furrowed. Something about the shape of her face nagged at him. But his wine-soaked brain, trained to sort people by usefulness and appearance, never connected the radiant woman in indigo with the tired pro se litigant in a yellow cardigan he'd humiliated 4 days earlier. He offered her a sleazy little wink, raised his glass, and turned back to his crowd. Camille's smile went razor thin. She turned and walked out into the warm night air. Her work here was finished. The stage was set. Monday arrived with the same merciless heat. Pruitt sat in his chambers behind Courtroom 12, sipping black coffee and reviewing his docket, when his secretary knocked. Come in. Pauline. What is it, Pauline? A woman who'd worked for him for nearly a decade and feared him quietly the whole time, stepped in, holding a thick sealed envelope stamped with the state seal. Her hands trembled. A courier just dropped this off. Judge. Marked confidential. Personal service required. Pruitt frowned, snatched it from her, and tore it open. Judicial Conduct Board of the State. Notice of formal proceedings and mandatory summons. He rolled his eyes. Unbelievable. Some disgruntled loser filed a complaint. These bureaucrats have nothing better to do than harass working judges. He skimmed for the charges. expecting some minor note about tone or scheduling. As his eyes moved down the page, the color drained from his face, bias and prejudice based on race and economic background, denial of due process, failure to maintain dignity and courtesy toward litigants. He flipped the page. Incident, reported Whitfield v. Briar Creek Property Owners Association. Courtroom 12. Thursday, March 21st. His stomach dropped. The pro se woman. The fence case. He remembered every word now, the girl comment. The remark about her background. A cold sweat broke across his forehead. Pauline, he barked. Voice cracking. Get Edmund Voss on the phone. Clear my morning docket. Tell them it's an emergency. Half an hour later. Edmund Voss, the most feared judicial defense attorney south of the capital, sat across from him reading the summons. His expression grim. Walter, this is bad. They're not asking for a written response. They want you in front of the full board Thursday morning. That means they think they already have everything they need. It's a misunderstanding. Powerless. Pacing. The woman was uncooperative. She was playing lawyer. I lost my temper for a second, it happens to everybody. You called a black litigant girl, on the record. Walter, you made remarks about her economic background. The new chairwoman of this board was appointed specifically to root out exactly this kind of conduct. She's not going to settle for an apology. Pruitt grabbed his own hair. The nomination. If the White House caught even a whisper of a formal board investigation, his appointment was finished before it ever reached the Senate. So what do we do? You go in Thursday and act like the most repentant man in the building. Voss said firmly. Exhausted. Medical issue. Maybe blood pressure, medication. We apologize. Offer bias training. Throw ourselves on the board's mercy. But whatever you do, do not go in there acting like you own the room. If the chairwoman sees one flicker of arrogance, she'll bury you. Pruitt nodded rapidly. Humble. Repentant. I can do that. But underneath the agreement, a cold, creeping dread had already taken root. For the first time in his career, Walter Pruitt was afraid. Thursday morning. The boardroom of the Judicial Conduct Board was built to intimidate, windowless, paneled in dark acoustic wood, dominated by a long semicircular desk where 6 commissioners sat. It felt less like a hearing room and more like a place sentences got handed down. Pruitt sat at the respondent's table in his most conservative navy suit, hands folded, trying to project somber dignity. Beside him, Edmund Voss reviewed his notes one final time. The heavy doors opened. 5 of the 6 panel members filed in a mix of appellate judges, senior attorneys, and civilian appointees, and took their seats without a single glance toward Pruitt. The center chair, the chairwoman's seat, sat empty. Where is she? Pruitt whispered. Psychological games. Voss murmured back. Quiet. Don't give them a reason to frown. The side door clicked open, and the room held its breath as the chairwoman entered. She wore a sharp, double-breasted, plum-colored suit, hair styled immaculately, carrying a slate-blue leather binder that she set on the desk with a heavy deliberatitud. Pruitt looked up, expecting some grey-haired political appointee. Instead, he saw the woman in the indigo gown from the gala, and then, as she adjusted her glasses and looked directly down at him, the truth hit him like a freight train. The tortoise-shell glasses, the sharp cheekbones, the faded yellow cardigan, suddenly reassembling itself in his memory. The woman holding total authority over his career, his pension, his future, was the pro se, nobody he'd humiliated in his own courtroom 11 days earlier. A strangled sound escaped him. Half cough, half whimper. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles bleaching white. his face draining to a sickly grey. "Walter, what is it? Are you having a heart attack?" Voss whispered. "Elamil." Pruitt couldn't speak. He could only point a shaking finger toward the chairwoman's seat. Voss followed the gesture. He looked at the chairwoman. Then down at the case file in front of him, Whitfield v. Briar Creek, then back up at her. He sagged in his chair and let out a long, defeated breath. There was no defense left to mount. They had walked, eyes wide open, into a trap of catastrophic proportions. Camille Whitfield did not smile. She didn't gloat. She simply opened her binder, pressed the microphone, and looked down at the man trembling before her. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice ringing with crystal clarity through the silent room. "This panel is called to order to address formal disciplinary charges against Superior Court Judge Walter Pruitt, Chairwoman." Pruitt's voice came out a pathetic squeak. "I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Judge Pruitt Camille cut in, the words sliding through his stammer like a scalpel. "That the woman standing in front of you was the chairwoman of this board. Is that a prerequisite for basic human decency in your courtroom? Does a citizen need a title before they're exempt from your contempt? No. Your no. I was having a difficult day. My blood pressure, save it." Her tone dropped. Freezing. She picked up a sheet of paper. "Let's dispense with the theatre. I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself. Judge Pruitt, because your own words already explained everything this panel needs to know." She lifted the authenticated transcript and began to read, stripping his words of the booming courtroom echo that had once made them feel powerful. In the sterile quiet of the boardroom, they sounded smaller and uglier than ever. "I don't need you reading me bylaws. Girl, people from where you're coming from always seem to think the rules are optional. One more word, and I'll have my bailiff put you in handcuffs." Each time she read a line, Pruitt flinched as if struck. The panel members watched him with open, unmasked disgust. Camille set the transcript down. "For the record, Judge Pruitt, I graduated first in my class from Vanderbilt University Law School. I hold a Master of Laws from Columbia. But my education isn't what's on trial today. And neither is my background. What's on trial is your fitness to wear that robe and serve the citizens of this state, a trust you have thoroughly, disgustingly broken. Chairwoman. Please." Voss tried. Desperate. "My client is deeply remorseful. He's prepared to apologize formally. Complete bias training. Except a probationary period. Mr. Voss," Camille said softly, "don't insult my intelligence or this panel's. If I had genuinely been a pro se litigant working a minimum wage job with nowhere else to turn, Judge Pruitt would not be remorseful today. He'd have signed off on an $11,000 fine, laughed about it over dinner at the Wexford Hunt Club, and gone right on, chasing his federal seat." At the mention of the nomination, Pruitt buried his face in his hands. A low, broken sound escaping him. "This panel has also reviewed more than 30 prior complaints filed against you over the past 5 years. Camille continued, describing a consistent, well-documented pattern of bias toward minority and low-income litigants. She looked to her fellow commissioners. They nodded. "Grim and unanimous. The Judicial Conduct Board finds that you have committed serious, indefensible violations of the Code of Judicial Conduct," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a gavel coming down. "We are unanimously recommending your immediate and permanent removal from the bench." Pruitt gasped for air, watching his career dissolve in real time. "Furthermore," Camille added, eyes locked on his, "this commission is forwarding the authenticated transcript and audio directly to the Federal Judicial Nominating Committee. The fallout was immediate, public, and total. Within 48 hours, the transcript leaked to the Charlotte Observer. The headline that ran above the fold was brutal. a sitting judge facing removal after a recorded tirade against a litigant who turned out to be the very commission charged with policing him. The audio went viral within a day. Millions of strangers listened to Walter Pruitt's voice, arrogant, venomous, certain he was speaking to someone powerless, and recoiled. The political abandonment was instant. The senators and lobbyists who had toasted him at the Wexford Hunt Club suddenly couldn't remember his name. Harold Pemberton, scrambling to protect his own firm's reputation, issued a public statement calling Pruitt's language shocking and indefensible. The federal nominating committee pulled his name before the week was out. Facing certain impeachment and formal disbarment proceedings, Walter Pruitt submitted a one-sentence resignation letter to the governor 3 weeks later. Under a clause in state law governing resignation during active disciplinary review, he forfeited a significant portion of his pension. He became exactly what he'd spent his career mocking other people for, a cautionary tale. Whispered about in law school hallways, 6 months later, Camille Whitfield sat in her office, overlooking the Charlotte skyline. The board had teeth now. Every judge in the state understood that the old, comfortable network of quiet protection was finished, that somewhere in the back row of any courtroom, in a faded cardigan or worn-out sneakers, the eyes of real accountability might be watching. Victor Lane walked in and dropped a fresh stack of files on her desk. He glanced at the bare patch on the wall where they'd once kept Pruitt's caseboard. Heard he's trying to open a small practice out in the suburbs, he said, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. Turns out nobody wants a disgraced former judge handling their case. Camille didn't smile. She wasn't interested in his ruin for its own sake, only in the fact that something rotten had finally been removed from the system. Karma. She'd come to understand. Didn't need to shout. Sometimes it just wore a faded yellow cardigan, stood quietly at a podium, and let arrogance do the rest of the work on its own. She picked up her pen, pulled the first file from the new stack, and got back to it. There was still work to do.